Good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to Living in the Promised Land, an Immigrant Rights Podcast. This is your host, Mark Schmoily, and today we're going to continue talking about the abduction of academics, students, uh, professors, and others from the streets of the United States and shipped to the Deep South. And specifically today, we're going to talk about Dr. Badr Khan Suri, who is a postdoc fellow at Georgetown University. I don't believe that he's still an active student, and Georgetown seems to be tepidly supporting him, if that's right, supporting him and wondering his whereabouts. But he was taken. He's married to a U.S. citizen. He's a professor there. He's a mentor to students, from what we understand, and I know from having been on the campus at rallies that many students are concerned, supporting, and fighting for his release. And so it's a very complicated story, and we're going to try to make it make some sense today, and also to draw the knowledge and the questions that we've been asked. And so today, we have Hassan Ahmed here. Welcome, Hassan. And
Thanks for
he
having
is
me, Mark.
sure, and he is a longtime immigration attorney. Also, gets involved in policy. Has run for office in Virginia. Is involved in his community, and has Hassan and I wrote an article on the history of Islamophobia that led up to the first uh, the first Muslim ban. If we There might be a second coming along. There might be already happening, but certainly there is a ban on supporting a Palestinian freedom and liberation, and that is definitely happening. And with that, Hassan, how are you this morning?
Doing all right, Mark. Thanks again for having me, and I'm looking forward to delving into some of these issues and trying to deconstruct why we're in these times.
Yes, in these times. And so if you could just elaborate a little bit on my brief outline of what happened. Who is Dr. Sordi, and where he is today?
Sure. Well, I first got wind of the case a few hours after he was arrested late night on March 17th. And I immediately knew that it was going to be important to file a writ of habeas corpus as quickly as possible because I knew that ICE was going to move him to Louisiana or Texas or someplace in what we call the Fifth Circuit. The United States is divided into different judicial circuits, and the Fifth Circuit covers Louisiana and Texas, and there's a number of detention facilities there, and it's been longstanding practice, and anybody who practices removal defense or deportation defense knows that the judges, immigration judges down in Louisiana and Texas can be relied upon to summarily deport people and sign orders of removal. And the Fifth Circuit, which is the appellate court that sits there, widely regarded as one of the most anti-immigrant and toughest, appellate circuits to deal with. So even if you do get a win, it's likely to be appealed, and the Fifth Circuit would slam it down. So I learned this back in 2008 with a client of mine who was detained in Jersey, and New Jersey, and I called the detention facility to make sure that he was there, and drove up the next day and get to the detention facility in the afternoon, and they find out they shipped him to Louisiana at 5 a.m. that morning. So it's something that I've seen over and over again, and many of my colleagues, anybody who practices, like I said, in this space knows that. Getting back to Dr. Suri, he is a scholar, um, is a postdoc fellow, has his PhD in peace building and conflict resolution. And on the night of March 17th, he was abducted, picked up right outside of his house, coming back from an iftar, breaking fast. It was the month of Ramadan then, um, and shipped the next day to Louisiana, Alexandria, Louisiana, on the grounds that his presence in the United States was could have potential adverse effect on the foreign policy of the United States. A scholar of peace building would be
And
bad.
and just briefly, so people understand, what is a writ of habeas corpus?
That is a writ basically to argue that, an action that you file in court to argue that someone's detention or incarceration is unlawful, is illegal in some way. So it's a way to get people out of detention. And our, argument here was that this statute, this law, this deportation ground of foreign policy being a reason to just detain somebody is an egregious violation of people's Fourth Amendment rights and other and those rights attach to people whether they're when they're in the United States, and it doesn't matter what their status is. Um, we haven't yet had a hearing on these issues, but the fact that this law is being used to weaponize the immigration system as a way to clamp down on free speech and other constitutional protections, which I'm going to talk about in a second, this is unprecedented. The law itself has existed for quite some time, but it was very sparingly used, as it should be. It provides a lot of power, and unfortunately, the state of the law right now is that it essentially allows the Secretary of State, in this case, Marco Rubio, to essentially pick people off and say, you're deported, you're deported, you're deported, with close to no judicial oversight or accountability.
Well, and this particular law comes out of the 1952 Cold War Immigration Act, but it existed in different forms before. It existed in different forms, and it was used in World War One, and we go back to the Alien Sedition Act, and they kind of connect to each other in that way. And what is seen, as a threat. And I know people remember from their history books, at least for me, the history, the writ of habeas corpus came up during the Civil War when, President Lincoln jailed Confederate sympathizers really close to Washington, D.C. And one could credibly argue that you had true rebellious traitors, insurrectionists, terrorists, all of the terms now at the gate of the White House, really, in Virginia across the way, and he was putting them in jail. So if ever a hearing in those states was not justified, it would be then. But still, people fought for that, and so I, the difference between the two is so stark when you think about throughout history a direct threat to the foreign policy of the United States, and we know that the president was assassinated, and there were many plots to assassinate him during the Civil War that failed, and so it was actually there was a rationale for it, but still, it was an issue. So that is where the Constitution is. And I just want to add one quick thing before we jump into your explanation of why that's big on the Constitution. For people out there noting and thinking the courts will do everything, remember, Dr. Suri was abducted on March 21st. The first hearing is May 1st. So, and we see this with these other cases. And so I want to, we could talk a little bit later, but the strategy of time going on, because people think a judge is going to make a decision and that's going to be that. And we've seen in these cases that not happening. So you just talk about the due process and where you see that.
So it was actually March 17th, and his first
Oh,
immigration court hearing is May 6th, so it's
mm,
even later. And the only reason he has a hearing on May 1st is because that's the date that we had noticed for the writ of habeas corpus and whatnot. So he's been detained for over 40 days
yes.
now, and I want to stress this. He has been accused of no wrongdoing whatsoever. Nothing. And in fact, the agents who shackled him and stuffed him into an SUV on the night of March 17th actually told him, we know you've done nothing wrong. But yet here he is wearing a red jumpsuit, which is the color that's given to high risk inmates and detained 1,500 miles away from his family and his lawyers, even though he's done nothing wrong. We are a country that does this to people.
Well,
So
and so what is
uh,
the accusation?
it is nothing more. Okay, so the notice to appear, which is the charging document in immigration court, and by the way, that's the government. The only process that exists for him that was initiated by the government is a removal proceeding, and it is very simple. And it just says you're not a citizen of the U.S. You were a citizen of India. You were admitted in lawful status on a J-1 visa, and on March 15th, 2025, the Secretary of State determined that your presence in the United States could have adverse foreign policy effects for the United States, and on this basis, you are subject to removal under Immigration Nationality Act Section 237A4C. That's it. That's all it says. Um,
And, well, and the
so
ironic thing about the visa is that a J-1 visa is issued to people in the foreign policy interest of the United States, because it's for exchange. It's for exchange students. So it has to do with foreign policy. So people come here and learn things and are in some cases supposed to take that back to their country. So it really is a sort of Cold War, what they call soft U.S. foreign policy, in that we are bringing folks here and they're learning the ways and values and getting the education in the United States. And it's extremely ironic that it's this extremely arbitrary and authoritarian action happened to him.
it's ironic for another reason, Mark, and
Sure.
that's the reason why he's there. That's absolutely true, everything you just said. But it's ironic for another reason in that Dr. Suri's particular field is peace building.
Yes.
Middle
What was
East
the
peace.
department? What's his department? His department is the
Right.
Muslim
It's
Christian.
the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. That's right. It
So
literally is. This has been his life's work. He's an academic. He's published, and he's devoted his life to understanding conflict and peace building, and literally came to the United States on a J-1 visa in December of 2022 for furthering that purpose. And then all of a sudden, on March 17th, 2025, that same purpose was deemed to be a threat or potential threat to the foreign policy of the United States. What changed?
have they provided any evidence of the nature of his threat?
Um, I wouldn't call it evidence. They have tweeted, they have said things with no basis, but they have said that he has spread Hamas propaganda. And they also and this is what distinguishes my client's case from many of the other, abductions, which are equally heinous. Um, they're going based on his relationship with his family ties to his father-in-law. His father-in-law, whom he has met exactly twice in his entire life, um, was a former advisor to one of the founders of Hamas and publicly left the Hamas organization 10 to 15 years ago, publicly denounced October 7th as a grave mistake. Um, and my client, Dr. Suri, has met him twice, like I said, and one of those times was to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. Um, has no other, relationship with him, and our government has punished him based on who he's related to. This is guilt by association. We're a country that does that too.
Well, so I've read that in the Georgetown newspaper that they're also saying that his wife is spreading Hamas propaganda. Is that strictly due to who her dad is?
Yeah, it's guilt by association. There's been no evidence whatsoever. His wife is also at the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding and also was an academic, is a student. And both of them have devoted their lives to uplifting oppressed voices. Obviously, her wife is his wife is a Mufaz Saleh is a Palestinian American. She was born in Missouri. Her roots are in Gaza, and she has acknowledged and fought for the humanity and recognition of the Palestinian people. That's it.
Right. And uh, we've seen, and I always do this caveat because I never want to I mean, if somebody is doing something that is criminal, if somebody is in a rally or protest and they are attacking somebody else physically, if they are, committing another crime, then that crime, definitely is prosecutable, and there's no defense of that. Or if they are saying, the hateful things that are alleged to be said, but having been at many protests, including at Georgetown and GW and in their encampment, I mean, I've talked about that in other sessions. That's just not true. But as I talked about last week with Rumisa Ozturk, who wasn't really at any protests and just wrote an op-ed. There are people that they are picking up, who are just more, people. Some people are out, some people are in, and then there's Mahmoud Khalil, who was clearly a student leader. But it shouldn't matter, and at all. And in fact, um, it's there's nothing that should matter there, and to associate it with harming U.S. foreign policy is that leap. That's when I think that leap, it just seems insane, and they're relying on, it seems, they're relying on just saying it. And what's been the history of courts speaking about this?
It's deplorable, if I would just say, like I said, it was a law that was passed in a different time for a different purpose. The most recent sort of seminal case here on the foreign policy ground was a Board of Immigration Appeals decision in 1999, which grew out of a international dispute over the former Deputy Attorney General of Mexico, Ruiz Massieu, um, who launched an investigation in Mexico in 1994 over the assassination of his brother. He perturbed the wrong people, found himself in the United States in the mid 1990s, and the United States sought to extradite him 4 times. Mexico wanted him back. They were accusing him without evidence of a number of crimes like money laundering and corruption and et cetera, et cetera. The United States tried to extradite him 4 times and failed because there was no evidence that he'd actually done anything wrong. And so finally, in the late 1990s, relied on this foreign policy ground, this very same foreign policy ground, to try to deport him. The case made it up to, well, first of all, the statute itself was ruled unconstitutional by a district court judge by the name of Mary Ann Trump, the sister of the current president,
Mhm.
in 1996, and found that there is no way that a statute that gives this much power to one person, immune from judicial review, is constitutional. Now, that ruling was reversed on appeal by the Third Circuit, but significantly not on constitutional grounds. It was on technical grounds, and the Third Circuit never actually reached the issue of whether or not the statute itself was constitutional. It just was not an issue that needed to be reached. It was reversed on other grounds. So Judge Marianne Trump's decision outlining the constitutionality is still one of the best roadmaps. It's still one of the best reasoned analyses that we have on the constitutionality of the statute. The board, unfortunately, the Board of Immigration Appeals in 1999, by the time they got the case, um, ruled essentially that the job of a court in reviewing the Secretary of State's determination is merely ministerial. And what does that mean? It means that we don't get to ask any questions about whether or not the foreign policy ground makes any sense. We don't get to ask any questions about whether it's actually good for policy, even though the text of the statute says that the Secretary of State's belief has to be reasonable. The board all but shut off any amount of judicial oversight and said, all we can do is to check to make sure that the letter exists, that it was signed by the Secretary of State, and that it alleges some reason, you know,
Yes.
and that's it. And there was a brilliant dissent written by none other than our good friends Paul Wickham Schmidt and Laurie Rosenberg, or written by Laurie Rosenberg, in which Judge Schmidt joined. That said, that's crazy because it goes against the plain text of the law. The law says it has to be reasonable. How do you tell what's reasonable if you don't apply some amount of judicial oversight to it? How can you say what's reasonable? You're going against the plain text of the statute. In addition, there's one other point that I wanted to that I feel is lost in this, and this is going to get a little in the weeds, but I really think it's important. The way the statute is written, it actually says that Secretary of State can make this, if he has reasonable belief, he can pick off somebody and say that they can be deported. Okay. But he's not supposed to do that if the belief is based on conduct or activities that would be constitutionally protected, right? So free speech falls into that, and presumably freedom of association, i.e., who you marry, who you're related to. These are constitutional protections. Now, if he wants to make a determination that flies in the face of that, in other words, he wants to make a determination to uh, to pick off somebody for deportation based on conduct that would be constitutionally protected, there's two additional requirements. One is that he has to go and timely notify the heads of four different committees, two on the Senate side and two on the House side, congressional committees, and he has to explain why the deportation of this person is furthers a compelling government interest. So it's not just reasonable, there's a compelling government interest that has to happen here. To date, neither in the case of Mahmoud Khalil or in the case of Badr Khan Suri or any of the other cases has there been any indication that Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, followed the procedure in the statute itself.
Uh, well, no, thank you. That is important because as much as people are focused on these things, and I can say there hasn't been this much focus on any immigration case really since uh Ilian Gonzalez and the Cuban boy that was
Right.
whose mother died, bringing him to the United States, and his father was still in Cuba, and his relatives in the United States who were violently against the Cuban government fought him for custody, and it was all over the news, and we saw the SWAT teams taking the U.S. Marshals and SWAT teams taking him out and sending him back to Cuba, and that was on the nightly news. Now we have so many on the nightly news that people are it's just getting people can be confusing. So this statute is used in some of them, and um this is a it's important how this is supposed to work. And you're right. I mean, I really recommend people read Mary Trump's or at least go to your AI and just look up, because she had some amazing quotes in there talking about the dangers of giving this much power to the executive and what it could do to the country. And it's actually, I know this surprises people. She was kind of known as a tough law and order. I mean, she was appointed by Reagan, and then as a district judge, and then appointed to the Third Circuit by Clinton, and with a Republican Senate. So he had to get her through, and she's nobody's super liberal judge. She's not her brother, but she's not that. But it's a very well written, excellent roadmap, and it's a shame that it didn't have an appellate court attached to it, and that the only reasoning we have is, the lame Board of Immigration Appeals, which is, for people to know, that's the next step after the immigration judge. So in these cases that we see in immigration court, like Mahmoud Khalil, where the judge found him removable, we can't expect that the Board of Immigration Appeals is going to reverse that. And if they do, Hassan, what can the Attorney General do with that decision?
That's the other, another little known power that was buried in the Code of Federal Regulations that allows the Attorney General to essentially, well, certify cases to themselves. And this again was a sparingly, and basically what they do is they take a Board of Immigration, a BIA decision that they don't like, and they certify it to themselves, which is kind of like appealing it to yourself. and for the purpose of gutting it. Now this was used sparingly by Attorney General Lynch under Obama and in years past. When Jeff Sessions became Attorney General, I believe he used it no less than 6 or 8 times in his first several months of office of work, and it's literally they go through all the pro-immigrant decisions, and these are cases and case law that attorneys like you and I use in our daily practice to build our arguments for our clients' protection and build their cases, and he was just gutting them one by one. So a board decision can very easily be appealed or certified to Attorney General Pam Bondi, and just gutted, even if you do win. So there's significant obstacles here.
So yeah, and so just to talk and get back to Dr. Suri. So he's in a detention center uh in Dallas. How often and how do you communicate with him?
Um, it's cumbersome. I myself, when he was first moved to Louisiana, I we tried several times to get a hold of him when we found out that he was in Louisiana, and it wasn't until I actually called the field office director of New Orleans that I was able to get somebody to put me through to him. It was not a confidential call. There were officers all around that were able to listen to the conversation that I had with him. I was trying at that point to introduce myself, and I was able to loop him in with his wife that night. Um, and the only thing that I could do to protect confidentiality was to speak to him in Urdu, which I did. So there was some measure of protection there.
And hope you
But
didn't have an Urdu speaking guard.
pardon, unless you
And
have
hope
Urdu speaking, right?
yes.
Or that or if they were recording it and would get it translated. But that's
There
the
you
only
go.
way that I could protect, and so I had to be careful about what I was saying. Um, and when he got moved to Texas, now what we have to do is send an email to schedule a Zoom call, and then they'll bring him in, and then we other attorneys and like myself, we can join in. But there's usually at least a 24 business hour lead time. So if I need to talk to him on Monday, I need to send that email by Friday because they will not respond over the weekend. And a few times when we've tried to reach him, and then they'll send an email at the scheduled time saying, "Sorry, there's an issue going on right now in the facility. We can't bring your client up right now." So it's a challenge.
Right. And I mean for those out there, representing detained folks in immigration court is difficult to begin with, but when they're nearby and you can drive to them, you generally know the guards, you know the procedure, and there may be but these delays can happen. They can have anything. I know I used to teach in a prison, and sometimes I'd show up and they'd say, "Hey, there's a knife missing from the dining hall. It's locked down," and they can do lockdown and equipment breaks.
Yep.
It's not these things happen, and emails don't get answered because yes, you send an email and you get your hour, and how often we're human beings, right? And so, how often do we have our meeting with a client and then say, "Oh, I forgot to ask that third thing. Let me call them," and they're on their way home in the car, or they have another question after meeting with you, and it can't happen. It can't happen because then you've got to do it
Right.
again. And if you meet with them too many times, they'll say, "That's enough." I mean, it really is arbitrary. And there used to be something called the ombudsman for ICE detention. And what happened to that position? Is
Yeah, all
it,
getting dozed. That's the term I the term I
yeah,
use. Everything's getting So it's all getting cut out, it's all getting ripped, it's all getting sacked, however you want to call it. But the point is that the services that we come to rely on to be able to drive our clients' cases forward, to be able to eke out some measure of due process and some measure of justice for our clients, all of those tools are essentially being taken away from us.
right. So you're at the mercy of a person at a desk in a huge detention center, and most likely, it's there's a lot of people in there overworked, what have you, and not uh not understanding the need for due process. It's not part of their training, et cetera. And so they work with what they have, and some of them are less than neutral, and it can be really hard. So
I think
how
there's
is
one other point that needs to be made
Mhm.
there is that many of these prisons are privately run. Due process costs money. That's bad for the bottom line.
Right, right there. It's and that's not a Trump thing. That's Many of these contracts were signed on as Biden was on the way out, and this is the this is the problem with that. There's just things that were existing are already there. So so they haven't presented anything as to the foreign policy, and it's kind of an open slate, right? I mean, the Board of Immigration Appeals has its decision. I sup- I mean, do you anticipate anything more than uh what they've presented?
No, I think that they're trying to make this in their typical fashion as quickly as possible, come up with something. I've often said that under the current law, Marco Rubio could just chat GPT a letter saying that, and at this point, what court would have the power to review it? And they're just going to say, well, we said what we said. You can't ask any questions about it. He's out of here. And that's as simple as they want to be able to make it. It is scaringly authoritarian.
I'm going to disagree with you there because ChatGPT requires some factual basis before they can write anything. They, that they require, right? So
Maybe I'm giving him too much credit.
you got to say something happened. Can you make it into something? Because really, and so what is Georgetown doing about this? What can they do?
There has been an outpouring of support, especially from the student body, from the faculty. One of the director of the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, Dr. Nader Hashmi, visited Dr. Suri in detention. There was a panel discussion I took part on, and they've been generally supportive. I think that there's always more that can be done. And I think that, how these initial cases play out and the fallout from them is going to set a very important tone as to what this administration can do and is likely to do in the future and how far they're going to push the envelope because they will. They're going to keep going and keep running over people's due process rights. Um, and sooner or later, it'll be your turn.
Right. And that's yeah, because or you know, uh for me, your kids, your other people that we raised are, I mean, that it turns out this is like the Cold War in that people don't see what's right and wrong. And I know where and I'm not sure that there's going to be the hysteria that we see to support. There certainly is that from the hardcore Trump supporters. I think a lot of the country's in shock, and I don't think this is really popular like it was. I was in grade school when uh, the U.S. embassy in Tehran was taken over, and there were Iranian students in my school, and my friend's big brother, I was in the bathroom, and he locked them in the stall, shut it, and said, "How does it feel now?" Like there was a real threat towards people, and people felt like because that shocked people in that way, and they were angry at another side. I mean, it was ridiculous because the Iranians in the United States sh- for the most part were not supportive of that. They were,
Of course.
and so that was crazy. And I mean, they weren't supportive of the new government. They just what was their political view, and we see that in the United States. And one of the case that gets no publicity, but it's from my native Florida, and I know you grew up in the South too, but not as South as going to University of Florida. And so in the '80s and organizing around the state on race and issues and all. And so uh, my first choice of college, which has been t occupied by DeSantis' new college at the University of South Florida, had a professor, Kevin Wang, and Kevin Wang was taught Chinese culture and I don't know if language, I believe, but he's an asylum applicant from China because he got on the wrong side criticizing President Xi and was forced to flee, and he's got an asylum case pending. But there's a state law, and there's a lot of those happening too that we'll talk about as we, try to grab everything in the air here. Um, but there's a state law in Florida that nobody who is not a green card holder or a citizen can work, who is Chinese can work for the state, and it's a state college, and so he's an asylum applicant. He's not technically a green card holder, but he's in status. He's got his application, and so he was fired. And they said, "Oh no, you can go on with your application that you oppose the Chinese government and are afraid of them, and you came to the United States, but we're going to fire you because of your being a Chinese national." Now, even in the right wing in the Cold War, even in the Reagan years, those kind of immigrants were seen as positive, and they were seen as in the foreign policy interest of the United States. And I can't imagine that. So that brings us to the fact of there's the ideological part of it, which is there, and the whole Zionism section, and uh, but there's also something else brewing up here because um and the other aspect of this anti-immigrant stuff is not just ideas, it's not just it's the continuation of what is the long held white supremacy. Pat Buchanan ran for president talking about it most openly. Most people don't talk about it as openly as him, but Trump does. The mixing of blood, the and so that brings us to, there's a few organizations that are out there, and FAIR, Numbers USA, and they were founded by a guy named John Tanton. And I know you know a little bit about him and have delved into him. So can you talk just a little bit about him and how he relates
Sure.
to Dr. Sorty?
Well, I see a continuous line between Tanton's thought and what's happening now with Badr Khan Suri and his colleagues, who have been abducted.
Well, who was John Tanton? Who
Well,
was
John
he?
Tanton, he was an ophthalmologist, oddly enough, an environmentalist from the wilds of Michigan. He was from Petoskey, Michigan, son of a Canadian immigrant, interestingly enough,
Oh,
um, and and was very concerned in the 1950s and 60s with population growth. There was a movement at that time. There was a book called The Population Bomb, published in 1967 or 68, that said that, well, the way the population is increasing, we're all going to run out of food by 1974, and it's going to be horrible. And all these theories have been debunked, but he approached this issue of population control from at the time, a unique perspective. So he uh, went from we need to take care of the earth. We are stewards of the earth. We are, he was actually a member of on the board of the Sierra Club, um, and uh, he went from that to we need to control certain people to that certain people's population, and then walked right into white nationalism or white supremacy as a method of controlling. Um, Walked into it eyes wide open. His theory, his thought, his writings went from eugenics, passive eugenics, to all out, white nationalism, where he believed that there's certain races that are superior to others, there's certain cultures that are superior to others. He was on a first name basis, buddy buddy, with a guy named Harry Ware, who was the long-term president of the Pioneer Fund, which is a fund that actually funds these pseudoscience race-based studies to try to prove that there are genetic differences between the races. Oddly
Can you
enough,
repeat that name,
it was
please,
formed in
Hassan? Can you repeat that name? You're a little crackling.
oh, Harry
Henry,
Weyher, Whyher. Um,
and
he
his
was
fund was,
president of, yeah, it was founded in 1937 and based their own family planning advice on the Nazis' Lebensborn program. Uh, Harry Weyher was the president of the Pioneer Fund until from 1950s until his death in 2002. The fund still exists. John Tanton founded in 1979, he founded the Federation for American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, which is the flagship anti-immigrant organization, which has since mushroomed or perhaps metastasized into a number of different organizations, including the Immigration Reform Law Institute, of which our buddy Chris Kobach was of counsel, former Secretary of State of Kansas, the Center for Immigration Studies, or CIS, which are our friend Andrew Arthur, former immigration judge from York, Pennsylvania, with an extremely high denial rate for asylum, is now a senior fellow. And also Numbers USA, which is the sort of so CIS is the think tank and Numbers USA is the grassroots organization. And that group was the one that was almost single-handedly responsible for lighting up the switchboards in Capitol Hill to defeat President Bush's, at the time, immigration reform proposal. These three groups, and there's a number of other fringe groups, such as Progressives for Immigration Reform, which oddly enough is a Tanton Front group, um, that have gone on and they've done consistent and work over the last 50 or so years to stall any meaningful immigration reform. They were the ones behind the draconian Immigration Reform and Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, IRA, in 1996, which was signed by President Bill Clinton, which shows that a number of things. One, that they're able to get their wins regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of what party's in the White House. And they've been infiltrating, putting their people into senior positions. IRA, for example, was presented by, it was a patron by Representative Lamar Smith out of Texas in the mid-1990s, but it was written almost entirely by a woman named Cordia Strom, who was a FAIR staffer, a long-term FAIR staffer. And essentially, one of the points that I think is not made enough is that everyone decries the 11 million plus undocumented population. No one stops to think, well, how did it get so bad? It's because of these anti-immigrant organizations who have stood in the way of every type of legalization, every type of form, every type of policy proposal that actually makes sense and actually uses immigration and uses the border as a tool to create prosperity. They have been against it every single time. And Tanton's legacy is in creating a discourse, a narrative, a frame of reference to further white nationalist agenda without sounding overtly racist. So they talk about border security. What they really mean is border militarization. They talk about anchor babies. They talk about illegals. They talk about job stealing. They talk about the threat. They talk about a security threat. They talk about language. And one of the other founding organizations that John Tanton founded was a group called US Inc., and US English, to try to anything to create the white Anglo-Saxon majority. And one of his famous quotes is, as European Americans see their numbers dwindle, will they go quietly into the night, or will there be a war? And these are the kind of things that he was talking about. These are the kind of things he was relentlessly fundraising for, and created this group of organizations from the shadows. Many people still don't know his name, and that's exactly the way he wanted it.
and why is that? Why don't they know
I
his
think
name?
it's
Or does he have documents somewhere that somebody might be
he
trying to get?
does. He does. He does. He donated 25 banker boxes worth of his thoughts on immigration proposals and ways to control immigration and his thoughts on eugenics and correspondence with people like at the Pioneer Fund, etc. He donated them to his alma mater, which is the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, a public institution. Um, and the first 14 boxes were always open to research, and I have copies of roughly 5,000 or so documents that from those first 14 boxes. Um, but boxes 15 through 25 were sealed at various stages as he donated his papers between 1989 and 2007. They were sealed to research, sealed to the public until April 6th, 2035. So when I first realized the centrality of John Tanton's role in creating these organizations back during right before the first Trump presidency, I thought it was important to shed light on it because sunlight disinfects, right? So I filed a Freedom of Information Act request in November of 2016 when it was still President-elect Trump, and that was denied by the University of Michigan to unseal those last 11 boxes. And that has led to a 8-year now battle that's been up to the Michigan Supreme Court and back and is now headed back up to the Michigan. Unseal those papers. There are documentation in there, state-specific tomes on immigration policy, proposals, a number of correspondence with people that shows exactly how the anti-immigrant movement, FAIR, CIS, Numbers USA, what their ideological and conceptual underpinnings are. And he didn't want anyone to see what was in those policy proposals until well after his death. He did die in 2019. He passed in 2019. And I've been involved in this fight to unseal those papers for the last 8 years now. We actually won an order unsealing the papers at the trial court level, and that decision now has been stayed and is headed back up currently in 2025 to the Michigan Court of Appeals, where it no doubt will be gone all the way up to or sent back up to the Michigan Supreme Court. But I
So,
think it's a shed light on
oh,
where they're actually coming from.
oh, absolutely. I mean, having been a graduate student in history and having written on the resegregation of the Bureau of Engraving, a tiny thing, but it's very enlightening. You're relying on people's papers, you're relying on those things, and historians are relying on it. And there isn't much. These are still relatively small, but extremely powerful, well-funded organizations and very centralized. And and this is the lesson that I think those of us, those folks who are um, who are abhorred, who are disgusted by what they see, and they'll ask us, well, what do you mean they could take kids? Well, let me tell you, before, when you tell people, well, before, explaining this law, which I call IRA when I've been interviewed on it and I think it's one of the worst laws in US history because it really did
Absolutely.
close avenues off. When you tell somebody that, um, these the woman that was the Guatemalan woman that was removed, and they said, well, what do you mean her kids went? But her the cancer medication is here, and it's like, well, the details of that case are different, but we all see people who have this situation where they don't live with their kids, and beyond, most people don't say, well, that's their fault because they're illegal. They're like, what do you mean? They think of it as a parent with children and they don't like it, but then it becomes too grand because it's all new to them. And so it's not something that is as ingrained as a feeling of justice, whereas these folks have built movements to create a narrative that every president talks about. And every time, I mean, looking at the history of Chuck Schumer and Ira, I had to research it for a case, the legislative history, and it's amazing. He was immediately capitulating, accepting all of these, as the chief negotiator in the House. on it, and capitulating to all these narratives. And I remember seeing, speaking at a panel right after Beto O'Rourke when he first got elected in El Paso, and I admired him. He was kind of like my hero because he ran in the Democratic primary against a Border Patrol official, like the director. I don't know if it was regional or national. I think it was national, and he ran and he unseated him, and he said no, because there was a bill that was there, and it was going to add. The Democrats just threw Border Patrol at the border, and he said, "No, you're destroying our communities. You're destroying our families," and it was like, wow, you're making that point, and there when you're constantly playing defense against an offense that is this well organized and this, it's incredible, especially when you have people from different ideologies. Like not everybody, most people are Chris Kobach and Stephen Miller haven't really expressed a whole lot of environmentalism in their time, but they,
Mhm.
people come from different angles. Labor, labor used to have that until they changed, and really the labor movement got revitalized by immigrants and always has been. And so they realized, geez, we're not going to, as we see with Abrego Garcia, the man from Maryland was sent to Texas. We saw his union stand up for him, and so these are the kind of coming together as a people. It's on we have the people. Most people do not believe in that ideology, hence hiding the documents, hiding the racism, hiding, like you said, the euphemisms, the border control, the, well, we can't have, and then if we can't have an unruly border, it's overrunning farms, it's overrunning the economy, and all of these narratives, and they do start from Tanton, and it really is shut down from the public view. And I think now we have people seeing all of these things happening, and it's kind of like whack-a-mole. And on the case of the woman and her two kids, when I say, well, if you're going for a green card, you can't. They're kind of telling this story now a bit, but you can have kids here, and their hardship, their lives mean nothing, and that used to not be that way before this law. This law made it so that having kids in the U.S. is not a means to stay here, and it took the term anchor babies and really codified it, right?
It did. It absolutely did. And it what I've come to realize after wading in these papers and seeing, my own experience as an attorney practicing over the last 20 some years, um, is that it codifies cruelty. That's what it does. It codifies cruelty. And it first of all presupposes that cruelty is strength and compassion is weakness, when in fact it's the opposite that's true. It actually it steals people, and you see this happening now. Well, too bad they made that decision. Too bad, so sad. And they're leading with these examples of yanking people off the street, coming in plainclothes officers with masks at nighttime and yanking people off the streets and separating kids. And we saw it during the first term. The examples are all in front of us. I don't need to rehash them. Um, and I'm reminded of a professor of mine, Sidney Rittenberg, who was one of the only Americans to join the inner circle of power in communist China. He was a UNC Chapel Hill grad like myself, and graduated in wartime and was drafted and just talked his way into studying Chinese instead of Japanese because he was afraid Japanese would fluency in Japanese would mean a long tour abroad, and he wanted to work on labor rights and organization in the South. Um, and he wound up spending 35 years in China, 16 of them in solitary confinement, jailed on trumped up charges of espionage by Mao Zedong. And one of the things that he lessons, I guess, that has stuck with me over the years is that the wrong ideology can produce thoughtless cruelty in otherwise good-hearted people. And,
Right.
it's he lived through the horrors of China's Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, saw, participated in all on this promise that this was necessary. repression against a tiny handful of class enemies was necessary for the good of the nation or of the community as a whole. And I see this same, sort of this necessary cruelty. This is something that we just have to do for the good of everybody else. And it is what he now considers to be the original sin of communist thought, that repression was necessary against a tiny handful of class enemies. And one of the other lessons that stuck with me after all these years, is that that one should reject um, overnight, miracles of social engineering, overnight solutions of social engineering. That's not how things get fixed. And so for Trump to come in and just like every tyrannical predecessor throughout history, to come in and say, I have the solution. I am the one that can fix this. I am the one that can right the ship of America. Right there, right there, your red flag should be going off in your head, because it is impossible to fix things overnight. It requires cooperation. It requires discipline. It requires people working together. It requires coalition building. And you know what else? It requires compassion. Um,
Hmm.
any other way is destined to fail, and it results in these Gestapo-like tactics of yanking people off the street and clamping down on their free speech. This is what it leads to. And we're seeing it happen on the streets of our own country. And I think that it's something that every American, every person who's here, American aspiring or otherwise, needs to take a firm stance against. We have to stop this from descending into fascism, because we've seen it happen. I mean, you and I have, I'm sure, as our colleagues have documented this in people around the world, and they come here to escape that. And now we're seeing it happen here.
Right. Well, again, again, I mean, it's a deeply ingrained, but it's also, that's right. And that's a great way to end. And I just wanted to add quickly that, I've got a cousin who works in a Maryland live casino. And he said to me last week, all these Nepali uh, dealers, a lot of the dealers at the table, there's like 100 Nepalis, and they're afraid to go back. And I didn't have it off my head, but I figured, okay, this is a TP, protected status, another thing they're attacking. But wow, all they're gone. And I said, how's that going to affect you? Well, we'll replace whatever, but you can see this churning. You can see that this is just like the union workers with Rodrigo Garcia and people in these communities. And one of the things when I taught immigration and ethnicity at Maryland about 12 years ago, I had the students do case studies, and it was my hope. There are these towns and cities around the United States where immigrants have integrated, the community is accepted, they work together. I mean, we see it in one of the hidden things is the who is sustaining these evangelical churches in the South? Who's going to those? As a lot of them are, the new blood there is immigrants, and people are, the revitalization is being seen underground. It's just people are quiet to talk about it, and there's many, we can't look at people and judge them around the country on how they might feel, because we're always surprised when people are supportive or non-supportive or not knowledgeable. And it's the purpose of this podcast, just to get these stories out there, because they want to bury these stories, they want to flood the gates, they want to bury these stories, they want to stick it on the side. Um and it does make us a less compassionate nation, and it will come back on us, because you know for all through, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing here,
Yeah,
white
and,
supremacy
and I
is
think the biggest
beneficial.
thing, honestly, I'm reminded of this as well, is that it doesn't have to be this way, and they want you to think that
No,
it does, and it doesn't.
that's right. Right. This isn't a real threat. This is, and people need to fight back on that. This is not a real threat. Well, Hassan, I know you're heading down to see Dr. Suri in the next week, next few days.
Yes. Next few
So,
days. Yeah.
give him all of our best, everybody, out there. And this might be airing after, but this will continue, and we'll have you on more as things progress with Dr. Sorty and the Tanton papers and anything else that we're working on. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the work that you do, Mark, every day, and what you've been doing, and reaching out and trying to uplift these stories. I think it's a really important conversation that really gets to the 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 soul of who we are as a country and who we want to be. So, I thank you
Oh,
for
you're
giving us
absolutely.
this
And
opportunity for being able to uplift this and
and
talk about
just
this.
quickly, your plugs. You're in Falls Church, no,
Sterling, Virginia.
Sterling, Virginia, where there's a new
Yeah, I moved
immigration court.
last year. Yeah, we're
And
out in
they
Loudoun County. So
they can find you on HMA at HMA Legal.
hmalegal.com, hma-legal.com, yeah. And
Okay,
I'm on Blue Sky at HMAESQ.
okay, and you can follow him there, and we'll talk to you in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye
Have a
bye.
great one.
Bye.
Bye.